everyone, it is Heather with Rose Hill Paper Cottage, and I have a request to show how I make stitch paper ribbon. This is something that I originally made back when I had first opened my Etsy shop. It's really fun to do and doesn't really take, much as far as material goes. There are like a few things that you need to consider when you are, creating this based on the paper that you're using. So I'm just going to kind of talk you through, what I used and kind of what to look for when you're going to choose something. But basically you just need, book paper, but you can also use different, ledger papers. Those would work really well. You just want to check for that bend. If it's got a nice bend in it for you to pleat it, then it's good. This paper here is very, very brittle, so it tears really easily and it won't fold well. Now, if that's the look that you're going for, then go ahead and use it, but it will be a much messier and much more difficult, look. You can also use tissue paper, like tissue instructions. So really, just check to see if whatever paper that you're going to use will fold. Maps would look really cool as well. So yeah, any kind of like scrapbook paper, pattern paper, whatever you want to do. But I really just, utilized book pages, and then I even did some music page, for my strips. So I'm showing like the 3 different ones that I primarily used, which was dictionary and then 2 sizes of book pages. So this one is 1 inch. And then the one in the middle is like 1.25 inches. So it's obviously easier, whatever width your ruler is, to, tear your strips. I didn't cut them, but you could. All mine are just, hand tore with the ruler. But you could, by all means, cut them into strips if you'd rather as well. And then there's different fonts. Dictionary page is really, really interesting. It's usually a smaller writing. But then, just from various book to book, you can get all kinds of, different, lettering. You could even get, French ones. But a good way to gauge, like, if, it's gonna, fold well is sometimes I'll just take a sample from a book and then I will just see how it folds. And if it folds nicely without, too much trouble, too much, cracking, then I will consider that like a good book to use. So this book in front of me is a really good book to actually use. It pleats really, really well. So that's just, something that you want to do to just kind of keep in mind of how easy it is to work with as you're sewing. So I'm going to show how I make strips with the dictionary page. And, you can take several different, pages at one time. It all just depends on the thickness and how easy it is to tear. So I don't know, maybe with dictionary page, I use like, 4 or 5 or something like that. But I just kind of, gather them up, have them all straight. And then I actually remove the border on the edge, but you could totally incorporate that if you want to. I use those edges a lot for, other crafting, maybe stamping with it, things like that. But I also would, throw that into handmade paper. So I don't mind, getting rid of that and not having that on my paper strip. I just want it to be more interesting, with the lettering. So you're going to see how I just kind of line the ruler up and then just tear. That's it. Not a lot of thought here. And then you'll have, a whole bunch of strips, in a fairly relatively, short amount of time. So it's easier to just kind of whatever you want to use to have it ready to go. So I'll recycle these. So I have a little stack here. Now, the next thing is your thread. I'm going to use a black thread. I typically use like a black, kind of a mustard color, and a red, but I'll use a black one for the paper. You can also use metallic, which I've done before, and it looks really, really pretty. You'll just want to use a different type of needle. It just helps from the metallic thread breaking, and shredding while you're using it. And I find that, I didn't have any problems using the metallic needle over just using a regular needle in the sewing machine. The metallic is much better. And then if you want to, have some other interest on top of your paper, you can just grab, whatever you want to grab, whether you grab smaller strips of paper or fabric or ribbon, whatever you want to add. I'll show one of the ribbons and kind of what it looks like and what that kind of entails. However, I always created just plain book page paper ribbon. I never did, any of the decorative stuff on top of it. Now, you can choose a straight stitch, a decorative stitch, a zigzag stitch, but if you've never done it before, I would recommend starting out with just a straight stitch. So I'm just kind of lining up with the needle, my paper kind of in the middle. And then I just start somewhere. And then you're going to see how I just kind of gradually pleat it. I don't try to make these perfect. That's not the type of work that I do or like to do. I like things just naturally as they are. So I just sew and pleat the paper as I go. Now you can have all your paper going in one direction. You can have it, some going one direction, some going the other. I kind of did every other one was, facing me. The others were not facing me, if that makes sense. And then you're going to see here how when I start a new one, I just kind of take that edge and tuck it under the next pleat. And I'm going to do this a few times. So you're going to see how that all, how I do that. You can also slow this up if you want to. So I'm going to just stick the next strip on top, put my foot down, and then tuck it under that edge. Now you don't have to do that. You can just keep going and adding your paper on top. You don't have to tuck it. I just felt like when I created it and I'm making tons and tons of it, it would constantly get caught, when you don't do that. And the seam ripper is basically my assistant. It is a high-tech tool that does multitudes of things. It doesn't just take out the seam. So I'm showing how when I do it that way and I don't tuck it under, it tends to want to catch on that. So I don't mind doing this. And when you're in a rhythm, it doesn't take long to do that. I'd rather do that than constantly fight with that edge. But that's just me. You know what? You do you. You do what works for you. And you're not going to know until you actually try it of what works best for you. So I'm showing there how when you're ready to switch out, it's nice to have the needle in the paper because then that means your paper won't move. If you need to lift the foot up, like times where, it's a little bit short, you haven't left yourself enough room. So this paper folds nicely. It's easy to do. But if you were working with a more brittle paper, or maybe one that was too thick, it may not be as easy to do. So just try it out. See what works for you. And I think this might be the last strip that I'll do. That's really all there is to it. And you can leave the strings long, you can cut them off, you can snip bits of this. I think it's really cool for just like photo props and stuff. So I'll, wind it all up into like a circle, and then, having several of these stacked on each other. If you look, if you happen to follow me on Instagram and you look back at other photos way, way back, you'll see that I have used this, as a photo prop for when I sold it. And then also, other times when I was displaying other things. So it looks really neat. It's great for, parties. It's great for, your journals, scrapbook, stuff, whatever you want to use it for. So I'm going to show this with ribbon. Like I said, this is my first time actually doing it with ribbon. Never have done it before with the ribbon. So, we're just going to experiment here. So there's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can either just have the ribbon float on top of your stitch paper ribbon, or you can actually fold it with, and I'll show both different ways. So right now I'm just going to float the ribbon on top. So I'm not going to be putting it into all the different pleats. It'll just be stitched to the top. So I have to make my pleat and then, allow the ribbon to just lay flat on top, and then I sew. So next I'm going to show how I'm going to actually take the ribbon and I'm actually going to incorporate it into the pleat. So I just use that seam ripper because the seam ripper is the star here. It's amazing. Everybody needs a seam ripper in their life. And then I'm going to join another piece of paper. So this might be where it gets tricky. This is definitely something I would do after you're more experienced with making the paper ribbon, seeing how it folds, how it works, then go wild. Get all kinds of crazy. This is really pretty, but it's a little bit on the more finicky side for me. So this isn't really something I would incredibly enjoy doing like yards and yards of or anything. So please don't request it. I'm not going to make it with ribbon on top. This is for you to do. Now, I'm not measuring anything. I'm not trying to, I'm kind of making sure that the ribbon is, kind of centered a little bit. But I'm not measuring all that. You'd have to be obviously a lot more precise and specific about, doing it if you want it, directly in the middle. And again, you can do this with another strip of paper. It doesn't have to be ribbon. And you could use a zigzag stitch. So this shows you how it looks. So the first part of it, they're both cute, but just one has a little bit more interest with the pleats because you can see each of the pleats with the paper. The other you can't. It's just, kind of on top, and it camouflages a little bit of the pleats. You could also use, like a glitter ribbon on top. This one is a little bit thicker, so I don't know if it would work as great, folding it under the pleat. It might just be just as pretty, just kind of glistening on top, and that adds another layer of, something interesting. So, just practice with it and see. So now I'm going to talk about sewing ruffles. So again, I do not measure stuff. I just go as I go. Other than like my strip, how much of a strip that I want to work with. So I have already, torn this. This is just from the top of like a sheet, a bed sheet. And so I've already, torn it. So I have a straight edge there to kind of go off of. And then I'm just going to snip it. And it's probably about 1.5 inches, something like that. And I just tear again. So then you got a nice long strip to work with. Now I'm just using white here. I don't typically, use white with black thread, but for showing this tutorial, I'm going to be using black thread on just a plain white sheet. So I want to just remove all of the extra, threads. I want more of a torn edge on there, a longer fringe basically. So I'm just going to get rid of a lot of the extra threads that make up the fabric. Again, you don't even have to tear the fabric. If you just want to cut it into strips, you can do that. It doesn't have to have the torn look. But this is typically, when I work with fabric, I typically do it like this. And you can use like your fingernails to kind of pull on the threads, or like I just did there earlier with my handy seam ripper tool. You can also, kind of, use the end of that to do it. And you can also do lace. You can do whatever you want to do. The way that the ruffle is going to lay is all determined on, how flimsy or how loose, thin your fabric is going to be. So you can see with that lace there, it doesn't really work. It's too stiff. I mean, you could do it, but it would be bulky. And then I'll show another piece of lace. So if I'm going to use this is more ideal for making pleats. Do you see how that folds really, really well? So you can just do the fold test, just like the paper. You can do the same kind of fold test to see what it's going to be like. So when you sew with a thicker cotton piece, you're going to have more defined pleats. They're going to lay kind of, similar in width, I guess I want to say. And I'm just using my fingers again. They do have a ruffled, a ruffling foot that you can add to your sewing machine to create your ruffles. I don't even mess with that. I just wing it here and I just feed it through. So I'm showing how when you have a smaller piece, you don't really have as easy of a way to get the fabric underneath there. So I use the seam ripper again. I just guide the fabric under there if I didn't have, the margins that I do on the side. So I'm showing right there how like it's kind of a cockeyed like ruffle pleat. And then how you can kind of just like shove the fabric more underneath the foot as opposed to, doing a pleat. And then you'll see the result when it comes out. So you can see how when I was a little bit gentler and just allowed, to sew at the same time, they're more kind of even. And then where I kind of shoved it really under the foot, which I kind of like to do, it's, kind of more like interesting there. It's not straight. And I will do a multitude of those type of, techniques. It all just depends on the fabric. Again, you're not going to know until you, actually start doing it. But I don't try to be exact. My pleats don't need to be completely perfect. And then I'm showing with the lace here, like you can't even see really a pleat because of the type of material and how see-through it is. And I use the same technique for everything that I sew. I just use my fingers as a guide. Now here I'm showing how I did the ruffle a little bit off center. So, and you can see the kind of look that it has, almost like a skirt, where it's cinched a little bit more at the top, because if you sew more to one side, then your ruffle is going to flare out. And that can kind of have a cool look too, especially if you want to like, edge a pocket or something. So I hope this was helpful. Feel free to ask me any questions below, but bottom line is you have to really just try it out and just go for it. So enjoy your day.